So, look who I finally dragged in here. I had to drag you kicking and fighting.
You did.
Why is that? Why didn't you want to come on my show?
It's not your show. It just don't like talking.
Well, you're going to like talking to me. You've talked to me for years.
That's true.
I've known you for how long?
I can't even remember when we met.
Probably 20 years ago, at least, I would think.
At least. Yeah.
So I have Virginia, also known as Jenny Couse Leavitt.
That's right.
And she is here today to talk to me about all sorts of things, including being the granddaughter of a very famous artist, Irving Couse, as well as her new book that just came out on Irving Couse, which I'm going to show right now for anybody who's watching on video. If you're not watching on YouTube, you don't get to see this, but if you do, it's a fantastic book. I've started going through it. Wow.
Oh, good.
That's a dense one. That's going to take me, I'll know a lot, won't I, when I finish that book?
You will. You will.
How long did it take you to write that book?
Well, I say in there 30 some years, which is true. Dean Porter said it took me 50 years. And I said, it wasn't 50 years.
Was there a point where you go, so 37, what happened 37 years ago? You go, I want to write a book on my grandfather.
Well, the thing was that my husband and I, when he retired from the State Museum.
And what did he do at the State Museum?
He was the curator of exhibits at the State Museum here in Tucson.
Okay.
And when he retired, we started going up to Taos to help my brother out. My father had passed away just recently. And so the house, my brother was taking care of the house up
and that's
there.
The Couse
grandfather's house.
Yeah, the grandfather's house.
And so we went up and started helping him. And when we did that, we realized that it was a treasure trove. Everything was there the way it used to be, and it hadn't been changed. All the archives and all of the collections and all of these things were there. And by that time I had gotten a master's degree in art history, and Ernie was a curator. So between the two of us, we just kind of knew that place had to be saved. There was no question about it. So that's what we started doing for the next. We'd go up every summer, first in the summer, and then we'd spend 6 months up there.
6 months there, 6 months basically in Tucson.
Yeah. And so then I kind of lost track of my train of thought.
As far as 37 years to make this book.
Oh, so anyway, so then what we discovered was all of this material there, and I knew what to do with it because of my degree. So what we thought first is that we needed to start a foundation to preserve it, because the whole family, which is unusual for any family to be in accord, so well as our family was, but everybody realized that it needed to be preserved.
And who all would that have been?
That would have been my sister, older sister, my brother who was younger, and then all their children and so forth. So it's just something that needed to be done. Everybody realized it.
And it was a family house.
It was a family.
It had stayed in the family.
It had stayed in the family. My grandfather bought it in 1909. He had gone to Taos first in 1902. But, and they rented various places. Then they had bought a little house on Kit Carson, not Pueblo Road, I should say. And then in 1909, they bought this house, which was a bigger piece of property. And
from the Martinez family?
No.
Wasn't it? Didn't she inherit it from, she was the maid and worked for?
That was George Smith's
maid, right?
Maid or whatever. She inherited it. But she wasn't, I'm trying to think now, it wasn't Martinez. Was it? Yeah, maybe you're right.
And then she,
you know it better than I do.
I'm reading your book, so now I know. Okay. And they swapped out. So Couse gave $500 plus his house on Pueblo Road, and then you ended up with that, or he ended up with that house in 1909.
That's right. And so she ended up with a house on Pueblo Road, which was good for her because she could rent the studio there, which she did.
Right.
That was the studio that he'd had over there. Anyway, where are we going with this?
So we were talking about how you started this 37 years ago and how the house kind of came into the family's possession in 1909 and stayed even at your grandfather died in what, 36?
36.
And then it went to
And
your father.
And my father didn't want it ever to change because he had such a wonderful childhood there. And they only lived there half the year too. They had a studio in New York. You always had to have a studio in a big city because in those days you couldn't sell art in Taos very well.
Right.
So, but they gave up that studio in 1928 and moved year round to Taos. That was an experience because
the Manhattan studio they gave up in 28.
Yeah.
Just in time for the Great Depression, which actually was a godsend in some ways, I guess, because you got rid of the high rent.
Well, that's probably true. And Taos was never very
affected.
affected because it never had much money up there anyway. So, but anyway, that it worked out pretty well. They didn't realize that it wasn't, that the Depression was on the way, but
yeah, nobody did. And your grandmother, she died about in 29?
She died at the very end of 29. And that was hard because they had been a very close couple, always, super close.
They'd been married, what, 40 years or something?
Yeah. And they were married in Paris, actually, when they were both art students over there. And that's where they met, fell in love at first sight. And that was it. 2 years later, they were married over there. The best, talking about my book, one of the best resources I had for that book was some letters that my grandmother's nephew, I guess, had given me, had inherited them and had given them to me. And they had been put away for years and just came out when I needed them, just rediscovered them, so to speak.
What was that like reading those when you pull them out for the very first time?
It was amazing because I knew they were family letters. I thought they were just miscellaneous, but they turned out to be her letters written back to her family from Paris and early days in Taos too. So, it was an incredible resource that there'd be no way to have that kind of a resource otherwise, first person.
Did she talk about being an artist? Because she was an artist as well. Or was it really more focused on her husband?
More focused on him. She does talk in her letters about her own studies, but actually she wanted to be an illustrator and had gone to the East to study. And then she was raised on a ranch in Washington State, but kind of a little bit of a privileged, not just a regular ranch family. And so she went to East to study and then went to Paris to study. And that's where they met. But she had a certain degree of talent, but it was not anything like his. And she also had eye trouble. So she started, she gave up her attempt to be an illustrator eventually, but, and put her talents into the garden there at the house.
Right. And that's what her gardens were famous.
Yes.
And are those gardens still there?
They are. They've been kind of restored because they'd been neglected a bit, but we've restored them. We try to keep only the type of plants no modern plants, just the plants that she would have had. And we have records from newspaper articles that were written about it and my memory when I was little and so forth. So
yes, let's talk about when you were little.
Pretty nice.
Where did you grow up?
I was born up in Taos. Well, actually, Raton. They didn't have a hospital in Taos at that time.
This is 1932?
Yeah. And so, but I was born in Taos. It was after my grandmother had passed away. So when she passed away, my mother and father and my sister, who was then 5 years old, went to Taos to take care of Granddad, because alone, rattling around in a big house that she'd never been alone before. he needed someone to watch after him, I guess. So they moved from New Jersey to Taos. And my father started his business up there, which was an important business too, that he was a mechanical engineer and developed. That's all part of the story of the house as well. But anyway.
What did he develop? You were about to say.
He developed a mobile machine shop that went into the field and repaired anything, built anything. He actually eventually, after Granddad passed away, he started a factory in New Jersey, and so the government bought hundreds of those, and they were all over the world during the wars.
And was that in your house, that area in the back with all that mechanical stuff?
That's right. That was where he started that.
Is that still there?
It's still there.
Does anybody dare to touch it because of what's going on?
Well, it's part of the story. So it was left the way he left. It is the way he left it. So it's all part of the story. Very interesting. In fact, we have 3 volunteers now. We call them the Kibbe Club. Well, actually, just as a joke, we call them the Couse-Keteers. They don't appreciate that very much. They don't mind being called the Kibbe Club. But anyway, they're studying all about that and making, putting the records together and so forth. So there'll be more and more about that known, really, when they.
And he was very successful.
He was very successful,
and that's not an easy thing to do in Taos, really, at that time, right?
It wasn't. It was when he went back east and started his factory back there that his success was. But even then, it was hard because he wasn't backed by some big company like Westinghouse or something like that. He was, it was his own company, and so he'd get these government contracts, and if they didn't pay right away, he couldn't pay his workers. Sometimes he'd have to let his workers go temporarily until they, he'd get. So it was a struggle, but it was very successful.
But once World War II happened, then he was probably.
That's where he was
really busy.
The government was, he was busy.
Oh, I bet.
It was busy. Hundreds of those were produced. And they're interesting stories that we've even had people come to the house who had used them, in Second World War.
And so you grew up in Taos?
So I grew up in Taos until I was 6. And my mother passed away when I was 6, so she passed away young. And
very young.
Yeah. And we went
That must have been devastating to have that happen.
Well, it was. I guess as a kid, you take those things in stride. You can't do anything about it. So anyway, her sister took over our care because my father was back east trying to start this business. He could hardly raise 3 children at that time. But her sister took over, so I was really raised by my aunt. And we went to La Jolla, California, to go to school out there because that was where there were good schools.
So you left at age 6 from Taos,
and we spent winters there. But every summer we went to Taos. So I really spent.
Half
we consider Taos our home really more than La Jolla.
And you got to know your grandfather just a little bit. You were young.
I was 4 when he passed away.
Do you have any memory of him at all?
Not a great deal. Most of it, what I know and remember, is sort of because of my research more than actually real memories. I do remember sitting on his lap, and I do remember kind of. Oh, there's one story that I remember really well because we were not supposed to go into the studio and bother him when he was working. But I was allowed to go in and call him to lunch. And so he'd put me on his shoulder and call me a sack of potatoes. And I do remember that. That's a really specific memory I have of him.
And so you go to La Jolla to go to school, really,
Yeah,
and then to
half the
Taos.
year in La Jolla and half the year in Taos is what it was, until I was an early teenager. And then we weren't going up there to Taos except just to visit on the weekends, or not weekends, but maybe a week at a time.
And did
Yeah.
your dad was kind of going back and forth from New Jersey to La Jolla to Taos?
Well, he would come to La Jolla to, on holidays and for our birthday, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So he would come to visit us. And then when he remarried, and that wasn't at all, I shouldn't say anything about that.
Yeah, you should.
probably.
Why not?
It wasn't an altogether positive situation.
For you?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. When did he remarry? How old were you?
I was maybe 14, 12,
Yeah,
something
that's a tough
like
time
that.
too.
But, well, it's a long story.
No, we got all time.
No,
Jenny.
I don't think
We're
I can.
We're not going anywhere.
I don't think I can tell that story. Anyway,
It affected you, though.
It affected us, and
everyone, all the kids.
Yeah. We never. Well, anyway, they started spending time in Taos in the summers and so forth. So that's when we stopped going up.
When your father and his new wife, so they would go up there, and you guys stayed with your father's sister.
Right, my mother's sister.
I'm sorry, your mother's sister, who was really kind of your mom.
She really was.
Yeah.
Really, she was. I don't remember my mother very well at all.
Yeah.
I remember, of course, I was very close to this aunt, and I've been reading and trying to, because we're moving to Taos, as you know. I'm moving to Taos, I should say, in the end of this month, and so I've been trying to clean out all of this stuff and all of these old letters and things. Some of them I've been reading, and it's really interesting to read some of the stories about that
time frame, you mean?
Yeah, I started to say something. Now I don't know what it was. I may pop in again.
Well, so your mother's sister, was she younger or older? Your aunt.
She was older than she was the oldest of 4 children, and there were 2 boys and 2 girls. And my aunt, then her brother, one of her brothers, then my mother, then another brother. And interestingly, my aunt was also raised by her aunt.
That is
her
interesting.
aunt had married into a wealthy family back in Rhode Island, and they had no children. And so would be my grandmother on my mother's side, and grandfather let my aunt go to live with this Aunt Lillian, was her name. And so she was actually raised by that aunt. And she had quite a wonderful life, really. But
did she have kids, by the way?
No.
You were her kids.
She wasn't married, and we were her kids.
Yeah.
And she was quite wonderful, actually.
I can tell you really loved her.
Yeah. And my children did too. It's been interesting, these old letters that I've been reading, because they're letters that I wrote to her that she had saved. And so I tell about, for instance, how much my children loved her. I mean, they just adored her. And so it was pretty nice. It was not a bad situation at all. It was good.
And so once you graduated from high school, what did you do from there?
I went to college in Illinois, and I majored in creative writing, and then I married right after college, and we came to Tucson. Ernie, my husband, had just gotten out of the Navy. He had 2 years in Navy because he was in NROTC in college, and had to spend 2 years in the Navy. So we were married right after he got out of the Navy, and we came to Tucson where he could start graduate school as an archaeologist. And so then we, raised the two children, and I decided to go to graduate school myself.
So did you use your creative writing degree when you got it? Did you teach, or did
No,
you had children right
I
away?
just raised kids.
How many kids do you have?
Two. That sounds like a lot, but
no, it is a lot. I've got two. So you raised them, and Ernie got his graduate degree in archaeology,
right.
and was stationed in Tucson the whole time. He got to work here.
Yeah, he was at the museum. Which is the anthropo department, was related to the state museum, close, and they just realized that he had a lot of manual talents, for one thing, and so he was hired even before he got his degree.
Wow.
And so we were always here. We just sort of.
And what did he specialize in? I knew him, which is nice, so I can talk about him. Always had a smile on his face.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah, he was a good person.
Yeah. And so did he, what was his specialty?
What he wrote his thesis on was prehistoric pottery design. And it's interesting how that turned out, because he started out, he was going to do his thesis on stonework, prehistoric stone. And he had finished his classwork and so forth and was ready to write. And we decided we would go back east to Massachusetts, where his family was from. His father taught at Tufts University. And that he would use this Harvard library, as part of doing his research. Well, we got back there, and we had, in the meantime, just for the fun of it, we had started making little tiny miniatures of prehistoric pottery. And they fit in an egg carton. That's the size they were, about an inch, about 2 inches, And so the story about how we started selling those was we were just students, and so looking for a little bit of income, and we were having fun taking these ceramic classes.
Right.
And so we went into the State Museum to the sales desk, and at that time Ted Sales was the what was he anyway? Anyway, was curator or something.
Yes.
Anyway, he was in the back of the sales deck in the office in back, and we brought in this egg carton with these little pots.
Prehistoric looking
pots. And we asked the gal at the desk if, maybe they might be interested in trying to sell them. $1 a piece we charged for them. And so she went back, and we could see Ted shaking his head. And so we thought, well, that was a good try, but no. And so she came out, and she said, he's asking if you could produce them by the gross. And we didn't realize that Ted had a tick, and so he was shaking his head. So anyway, we started making those, and we couldn't, they just sold right away. We could never make enough of them.
Oh, that's funny.
But they're really pretty.
Did you sign them?
Yeah, they had a little signature.
What was the signature?
I think we just put a little L on them, little L.
I love it.
And then we started later on. We were going to make full size, like Mesa Verde mugs and so forth. And I was in these letters that I've been reading. I learned something I'd forgotten totally about, that I didn't really realize. We had a real idea that we were going to market some bigger pieces, and we did make a set, but we never actually did that, fortunately. But
did you do this like a pinch and coil kind of method that you made the pieces?
No, we made little molds.
You made little molds. And so how old were you? Were you guys like in your 20s?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah. And so we went back east to, here he was going to write it on his thesis, where we spent all day in the basement of his parents' home there in Medford, making these little pots. We never had time to go to but what he learned was how pottery designs developed by doing this. So he totally changed the topic of his thesis
from stonework to pottery design. And was he trying to find individual artists that would make?
No,
was he?
Not prehistoric. He couldn't have done that.
Well,
I think they were maybe pretty long gone.
Yeah, I mean, just from stylistic.
No, it was stylistic, and how designs developed, how you would, how they were, the space divided and so forth, and then the influence of the transmission of certain elements of design between cultures, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. And so he gets his PhD.
No, well, it was a master's.
He got his master's. And so he stayed at the University of Arizona. Mm-hmm. You raised 2 kids, and at some point you go, okay, I'm going to get my master's in art history.
Yeah, and that was natural, as I said in the book, because
was this much longer? I mean, this is like 20 years later. Or when was this that you started to do this?
I've forgotten exactly when it would have been, but probably in the 70s.
Okay.
Let's see. Probably in the 70s.
And were you at that point starting to think about writing this manuscript or you knew there was something, or why art history?
Actually, art history, because I was raised with paintings, that was just a natural to think that I'd been surrounded by my grandfather's art and been just connected with art all my life. But actually what I was interested in was medieval art. And that's what I was really focusing on until we discovered this material up in Taos, and I thought that's what I've been preparing myself for without even knowing it.
Wow. And so when you were doing the writing, did you ever make art yourself? Did you ever try to paint or to sculpt or anything?
In college, I did a little bit. I took some art classes, and I took a jewelry making class, silversmithing, I should say. So I did a little bit. I decided that there were too many not good artists in the world, and I wasn't going to be one of them. Although I came across some of those paintings. They were kind of nice, but they weren't great art.
Your paintings?
My paintings.
Are you going to put those in the Couse Museum?
No. I think I put them in the trash,
actually. Put them in the dumpster. Did you find any of those little miniature prehistoric pots when you were cleaning out?
Well, we did have some, but the museum has a whole set of them, for instance, and
oh, that's good.
Yeah, they're around.
So
they don't cost $1 anymore.
The Couse Museum has a set?
No, actually.
You should give them one.
I don't think I have one anymore.
I'm going to start looking for them. There's invariably one is going to come into my gallery.
Sometimes you do find them.
Yeah, because you sold them here in Tucson through the museum, right? Yes, they have to be in Tucson. I'll pay $1.50. What can I do?
I'll pay $1.50.
Done.
If you let me know about it.
I will. How about I just buy them and give them to you if I see them?
Yeah, no.
So you get your degree, and that was here at the art department here?
Yeah, right.
And that was in art history with kind of a focus on medieval art at that time?
Right.
And then at what point did you go back to doing this Taos, the Couse house?
Well, that was, I mean, when I got that degree, right at the time, about the same time that my father passed away. And that's when we were able to, we needed to go to Taos and go through things. And that's when we realized what was there. And so it sort of all fell together. I never did do anything with the medieval except study it. And
so you guys have been working on that house for 40, I'm not even talking about the family, but you alone has been working on it over 40 years?
The foundation was formed in 2001.
Okay.
And Ernie and I had been working up there at least 10 years before that. And we just realized that we needed to form a foundation to preserve that house, that it needed to be preserved.
Yeah, it's a big
We
house.
didn't know how to do it. We
Mhm.
didn't know how to form a foundation. And one day, Ernie was out emptying the trash, which is out in front of the house, kind of beside the
Mhm.
fence. And this couple came walking up the street, and they were looking for the homes of the old early artists. And so they found that this was Couse's house.
Mhm.
He was a lawyer from Chicago.
Mhm.
And so we said, "You want to come in and look around?" So we showed him around. And he said before he left, and we told him that, that our idea was that we needed to form a foundation to
Right.
preserve it.
Right.
And so he said, I'll see what I can think how to help you. Well, people say things like
Right.
that. You never hear from
No.
them again. Well, this was in the fall. And in about February, we were down here in Tucson, and we had a call from him, and he said, "I'm up in Phoenix with my law partner and another friend, and we'd like to come down and visit with you." So they came down and spent the day with us talking. And before they left, they said, "We will set up the foundation for you pro bono." So that was
What was his
kind
name?
of Al Olson.
Oh, Al Olson. Yeah, of course. I know Al.
And so
No wonder that makes sense. He loves art.
Yeah. And so he, that's what he did. I mean, anyway.
And what is the foundation's purpose? In other words, what's its mission?
Its mission is to preserve that property and to educate about the Taos Society of Artists and the art of that Taos art colony. And so that's actually, so we set up the foundation. And, in about 10 years, the way that the property was set up, my grandfather had left the property to my father, all the contents of the house and the paintings, everything, collection, so forth. He'd left to my brother, sister, and me, and my father. So it's 4 ways. So the foundation had to buy the property, which they did after 10 years. They were able to buy the property, and the family gave all of the contents.
Oh, that's great.
So that it all stayed together.
And there is a lot of contents.
It's a huge amount.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about that. Just to start with the pottery collection.
Yeah, there are 100 big not prehistoric, but early historic
pots. Yeah.
And there are about 60 smaller ones. The foundation has been producing a series of books called not the legacy,
it's the Pueblo pottery pieces that your grandfather used.
There's a book, yeah.
Is there 2 books on that?
There are 3 now.
3,
well,
okay.
there are going to be 3. There's the one on the Santo collection, because they started collecting the early Spanish Santos from up there.
And Boltos too, right?
Boltos, and have quite a nice, not huge, but a nice collection.
And was that all through your grandfather he was collecting, or was your dad collecting that as well?
No, it was my grandfather and grandmother.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
And then, so we did, the first book was that, and the second book was on the pottery collection, which is, as I told you, this large,
I've seen them.
Really great.
Helped identify a few, I think, actually.
Yeah. And you were mentioning about makers, because some of those they have been able to identify the makers. Maybe you did some of that. Since they were collected, they didn't really know who the makers were.
And your grandfather would use those in his paintings, correct?
In fact, in the letters that my grandmother was writing, when in 1902, she would tell that they found this piece of pottery, and they bought it because he could use it. See, they didn't have very much money then,
Mm-hmm.
so it was a lot to spend $1.50 on a
Sure.
pot. And so they would buy, the excuse for buying it was that he could use them in his painting.
Right. And those
And
are
so
really, those pots at that time were fairly contemporary that he was buying.
they were.
Yeah.
They were. Yeah. And so anyway, so that was the second book. Now they're working on a book about the beadwork, which will be out in the fall.
And now that,
just those three, I think.
That house, which you bought in 1909, but there's also a connection, which is the church, which Sharp owned, right?
Mm-hmm. There's actually a common wall between the two. Mm-hmm. The Sharps bought their house, which is adjoining property, in 1908. That was the house that they bought in Taos. Mm-hmm. And in 1909, he bought this little old chapel, which dates from the 1830s.
Yeah.
Which is right just east of the house, mm-hmm. of the Sharps' house.
Right.
But it's connected to so anyway, so that's one piece of property. And was built by Juan de Luna. Mm-hmm. His relative Pedro Luna built a house against the south wall of that chapel. So and that was what became Couse property. That was the beginning of Couse's property. So there's a connecting wall between the Sharp and the Couse property. And so literally connected.
Right. And so Sharp would live in his little house next to the chapel, and the chapel was his studio to paint.
That was his studio for 6 years. Uh-huh. But it was kind of small. Well, in the meantime, Couse had bought his house in 1909, and one of the reasons was he could build a large studio onto the end of it, mm-hmm. which he did, this beautiful big studio.
When did he do that?
In 1909.
He did
that
right
was
then.
The first thing he did. And we kind of think that maybe that nice big space must have made Sharp a little envious, because then he bought property just to the west of his, not to the, would it be south, I guess, of his house, mm-hmm. and built a huge studio, even bigger than Couse's.
Is that part of the foundation, that?
And it's all the Sharps property and Couse property are part of the foundation. In fact, that second studio of Sharps, which was built in 1915, it started as a little old house, and he enlarged it. And it's a fabulous studio. It's been, let's see, was it last year, year before, a couple of years now, I guess. It's been totally restored, mm-hmm. to be like, because it had been rented ever since Sharp's death.
And he died in like 55 or
53,
something. 53.
Yeah. And so, anyway, it was totally restored, and the climate control and that sort of thing, mm-hmm. was put into it, so it could become a little museum. And so it sort of brought Sharp back to the site, because there was no place. Well, we didn't inherit any of Sharp's material, just the buildings. Mm-hmm. So, there was no way to really honor Sharp properly. And now we have a place, because that is a Sharp exhibit in there. Mm-hmm. And it changes every year. So things are borrowed in. And
so the foundation kind of sputters along from when you first started in like 2001.
And in about 10 years, and then it just kept growing and growing and becoming more viable and better supported and so forth. And then, now what's happened is that the Mission Gallery, which was next door, actually was built into what had been Sharp's house. Mm-hmm. So it's adjoining property. Closed because Rena Rosequist, who ran that for 40 years or something, she was no longer able to do that. So the foundation bought that property from her.
The
So
Mission Gallery.
the Sharp property came back to the fold, so to speak.
And that was recently, right?
And that was this last year. And now it's being refurbished, really. It's being built into an archive building, and a research center. And we got a big grant from the Lunder Foundation, who's from Maine, actually, and to help start that. And so, I mean, it's just growing and growing.
Now you have like you actually have a director of the museum, right?
We have,
or the foundation.
For about 2 years now, we've started having staff, maybe 3. We have a director, David Kerning, and then we have an administrative assistant, I guess you'd call it. They're a fabulous team, and they keep us going. And now we have also an archivist, so that she's working on the archives that have started coming in already.
And is that just for Couse-Sharp, or is it for all the Taos founders too?
For the Taos founders.
It's all of it.
Yeah. So we have already, the Couse archive is unique because it's never been separated. You didn't have to bring this material together. And right now, actually, it was down here in Tucson. We brought it down so I could work on it. And right now, it's all boxed up in like over 100 banker boxes of material that's ready to go up to Taos the end of the month. But go back to Taos. So that's one archive. Burning House's archive. His granddaughter lives there in Taos, so that's also going. It hasn't. She still has it at her house, but that's going to come.
It is, and they have a museum, Burning House, or his house, right? The Burning House.
No, you're thinking of Blumenschein.
That's Blumenschein. I'm sorry.
Yeah. The Blumenschein material is from Liz Cunningham, who passed away this last year, and her husband, Skip Miller. They were the ones who were working on Blumenschein, so that material is already there at the house being. The hope is that these archives can be put into order by the time the building is ready, which will take probably a couple of years, and they can go in and ready to use, once the building's open. That's the hope. So we have, anyway, and then we have Dean Porter's material, which is Ufer and Higgins. What else do we have?
How about some of the lesser known, like Kreitzer and some of those individuals? Catherine Kreitzer.
Kreitzer. Yeah, that's a hard one because it's even hard to come by her paintings, no less. An archive. I don't know if we'll ever. It's just this material will start to drift our way because it's going to be a wonderful research center for that, for those.
And that's kind of the goal, is to develop from all the Taos Society artists, their archival material, so there's places so people can do research.
That's exactly it.
Yeah,
exactly.
And it'll all be under the Couse-Sharp Foundation. Is that what it's called, by the way, now?
It's called the Couse-Sharp Historic Site.
And it's a foundation.
And it's part of the Couse Foundation. I mean, the Couse Foundation is the sort of underlying the basic that runs the Couse-Sharp Historic Site.
And so how can people find and help the foundation? What can they do? Well, you have an annual event, right?
We have an annual event. Well, it's not annual, it's biannual.
I see.
There's so many of those galas, fundraising things in Taos that it's kind of overkill sometimes. So we decided that we do it every other year, which has worked out really well for us. And this year, June 15th is this year's event. And so it's usually a weekend, that different things going on. On Friday night this year, we're having what we call a hard hat party at the site that's going to be the research center. And so one of the fun things that we're doing for that is, hard hats are no longer these round hats that you think of as hard hats.
Mm-hmm.
Now they have cowboy hats that are actually used as hard hats.
Oh, that's hilarious.
It is. And so we decided we'd have about 6 of them and have well-known artists paint them.
I see.
So, for instance, so far we already have one in hand that Jerry Jordan had painted.
Oh, so they actually painted the hat itself.
They're painting a scene on the hat.
On the hat.
And
kind of
so,
like the painted ponies that they did so many
exactly, that was the idea.
Yeah.
And so then, people will be able to put a bid in on these, and whoever puts in.
Do you know who the other artists that are doing that?
John Farnsworth is one. Let's see, I should know who all of them are, but Ed Sandoval.
Oh, that'll be fun.
I forget.
Well, there's 3 out of the 5, and they have to. That'll be online. Now, do you have a website?
We do.
And what's the website's
URL? If you look up Couse-Sharp Historic Site, you'll be able to bring it up, or look up Couse-Sharp.com, I think it is.
Yeah. Okay. And so
and so then it gives and all of the artwork that's going to be in the gala is being put on as we get it, and it's going to be pretty nice selection of stuff, very nice selection of stuff.
So what's it like to kind of made this life journey and have be about your grandfather? That's put a lot of effort and energy into this.
Well, it's a good job.
Yeah.
Don't get paid for it, but
are you considered? I've always considered you to be the kind of the authority on Couse's work.
On Couse, yeah.
Yeah.
Not on Sharp.
Yeah. But if there's a Couse that's out there, anybody who's smart runs it by you.
That's true. And they should, especially if they find it online or something, be sure to check with me first, because there are a lot of copies.
Well,
they're either, he
did the railroad.
The railroad calendars were very popular.
Right.
So you get a lot of amateur artists who just were making copies of those, and eventually, sometimes they make their way into the market.
Right.
You can tell them across the gallery.
Yeah, he did one of those every year, right? For the railroad, he would do a painting every year.
He didn't do the paintings for them. They bought a painting from him.
I see.
Although it became, as time went on, and this became a series, and he knew that they were going to buy one, they would sort of work together with, what would you think of, this as a subject matter, he would ask.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but he didn't, it wasn't like an illustration that was, except in the case of two of the paintings were really commissioned at the subject itself, because they wanted a chief that would symbolize the chief the railroad chief.
Yeah, the super chief.
Super chief.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so was that where is that painting? Do you know?
There are 2 of them. I think one is in a collection someplace. One might still be in Fort Worth, where the collection is now. There are only about 7, I think, of those paintings still in that collection. Unfortunately, the Santa Fe Railway collection was the first corporate collection in America. And unfortunately, it was together for a long time.
Very long time.
But, when the Burlington Northern joined the Santa Fe, they started selling them. So
yeah, that was like the 90s, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's too bad, but that's the way things go.
Yeah. So there's lots of copies out there of people that did it.
So
Poor
yeah,
copies,
so poor
which I've seen.
copies.
I've seen a million of them.
Yeah, those are one thing, but I just consider them,
Right. They're
what
not
they are.
fakes.
They're
Just
not fakes.
yeah, they're just
Then
copies.
there are a few. Once in a while, someone sends me something that is actually a fake.
Yeah, they're trying.
Intended as
Yeah.
a fake. And that, that's a whole different thing. That's interesting too. But they always make mistakes.
Yeah, like what kind of mistakes would you see?
Well, sometimes it's mistaken anatomy, because he was very good at anatomy.
He trained in academic in Paris, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and he was a figure painter. That's
Right.
really what he was interested in, was painting the figure.
Mm.
So, or they would mistake things like costume sort of things, or various, or the image. He painted he had certain favorite models.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very familiar with how those models look and how he painted them
Mhm.
very accurately, really. And so you can tell sometimes they're
Yeah.
just not his work.
Right.
And the brushwork too.
Right.
That's another thing.
And
So
his paintings they've sold for, I'm assuming, in the private market for probably over $1 million, haven't they?
I don't think one is sold
Not
for
yet.
that much. The one that I thought was going to hit that mark happened to be that two people were bidding on it, and one of them got sick in the middle of the auction, and so the competition wasn't there. So it was way up there, but it didn't go over the million.
Uh-huh. But close to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what do you want people to take away from your grandfather's work?
Well, one of the things that I'd like them to be able to look at and understand is they're not just images of somebody painting pottery or something. There's more to it than that, and it's hard to explain. It's a sort of a spiritual quality. He was always painting what was going on in that Indian's mind. The approach, how painting the pot was important, or that kind of thing. There's always a symbolism in his work that maybe most people don't really realize, but you can substantiate that by certain paintings that you have the sketches and so forth to
There's a
realize
story.
how he approaches something.
Each one had a story, really. Would you say that's a true statement? I know his titles feel that way to me.
In a way, a story, but not in the sense of a narrative so much as a symbolism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a more deeper sensibility.
Yeah.
Well, and living in New Mexico, he had a good sense of the people, of the inhabitants, whether they're native or whether they're Hispanic or whatever. I mean, he was part of that community.
Yeah.
And it's a small community, especially back then.
It's interesting. He never painted the Hispanics at all. The others did, but he didn't. He just stuck to the Indians.
Why do you think that is?
He just, from the time he was a child, he was interested in Indians.
Because he collected all the Santos and Boltos, right?
Yeah. He was interested in their art.
Mm.
He was interested in Indian art and Spanish art.
Do you think any of that was competitive as far as, okay, Phillips is doing, more Hispanic things, and maybe I should kind of stay in my own lane?
No, I don't think
really.
So.
Of course, the research will find out when we do more and more right over time.
I mean, even Sharp had more variety in the things that he painted than Granddad did. Granddad never even painted his wife's garden. He loved that garden. And there are a couple of little studies of the house that show the garden sort of in the front.
Yeah.
But he didn't ever, like Sharp painted a lot of florals and
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Maybe some of the ones right from your grandmother's garden.
Yeah, or from, yeah, and he also, his wife also
Yeah.
had a garden. But, yeah.
And so what do you see the future for the Couse-Sharp Foundation?
Well, I just hope it keeps going strong. And, you know, I think that we're kind of reaching an apex. I think that to accomplish what we want it to accomplish, it may be at that point, and as long as it keeps having activity and support, we'll be able to sustain it.
I think you will.
Yeah.
And anybody out there who's listening to it and you need to find a cause to support, I think this one would be a very good one to do.
It is a good cause.
We've always tried to.
It is a good cause. And it, you know, it means a lot to Taos to have that site there, because it's people come to Taos just to visit that site.
I have on many occasions.
Well, you naturally would, but I mean, even people not as logical as you. Yeah, we get people from all over the world, actually.
Yeah, I would believe it. It's a beautiful thing. I encourage people to go see it. I mean, it's a step back in history when you go there. That's for sure.
It is, and that's what people feel.
Yeah.
That it is a step back in time, and you get a real feeling of it. It's not
No,
Disneyland.
No, it's not put on.
the real
From when
thing.
you walk up to the thing and see the Sadie Adam Hopi tiles that are inlaid in the the wall. I mean, it's an amazing thing, and I encourage people to go out and see this foundation, support this foundation, and we're very lucky that we had what we finally got Jenny on. Wasn't that bad, was it?
I don't know. I think I don't think I'd want to see it anyway.
Well, lots of people will, I hope. And
I hope.
Yeah, and thank you so much. It's nice seeing you. I've got to continue to read your book because I'm not quite done with it.
Oh, good. Well,
But
I'm
there's a
going to
lot of-
read yours
Yeah,
too.
you read mine, and in fact, I got to give you one for the foundation so
That's
you can
right.
have it for the
That's
library.
right.
All
That's
right.
right. Thank you.
Virginia Couse Leavitt. Wonderful to have you, and look forward to seeing you up in Taos this summer.
Good. Thank you,
All right.
Mark.
Are brought to you by Medicine Man Gallery, located for over 26 years in Tucson, Arizona, specializing in antique Native American art, early Western art, including the famed Maynard Dixon, as well as modern art. You can find everything online at medicinemangallery.com. There's over 6,000 objects to select from. Also, the Charles Bloom Murder Mystery Series, written by yours truly, me, Mark Sublette. There's 6 books in this series, and they follow the protagonist Charles Bloom through all the intrigue of the art world set in Santa Fe and the Navajo Nation. These can be found on Audible, eBooks, Amazon, and of course, the gallery at medicinemangallery.com.